Sara Campbell, so awesome to be here with you today. I know that we have followed each other on the Twitter sphere. I think that's maybe how we know each other, and through the foster community, right? Which is something that you are a part of currently. So for anyone that doesn't know who you are and know about your work, I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe how you think about your work, how you refer to yourself. I know you've got this incredible coaching program, and I want to dig into kind of the nature metaphor. We're going to get into that, but I would just love to kind of hear you describe a little bit about the work that you do today. What's lighting you up right now?
Yeah, I'm really glad you're asking me at this point in time because there have been many points in time where it was not really clear. But I feel like in the last couple of years, I've really arrived at my mission, which is just to help people develop a really strong relationship with themselves, and learn to hear and listen to ourselves. And that kind of plays out in pretty much every corner of my life at this point. I am, like you mentioned, a coach where I have a coaching program for women that I'm working on getting off the ground. I'm a part of Foster, which is an online writing collective and community of practice for writing from a place of deep personal truth. And I also am on the board of directors of the Angel City Zen Center. So I've been a practicing Zen Buddhist for about 5 years now. Really involved in that community, which is all about meditation and, self-inquiry and all that. And then I write a newsletter called Tiny Revolutions, which is a sometimes embarrassingly personal newsletter about just kind of all my ups and downs that I started writing, I guess actually it's almost 6 years now, which is crazy to me. But that all of these things are kind of heart-centered projects, but after a career of many years in startups and the corporate world and all of that stuff. So it's taken me quite a while. But I finally do feel like, oh, wow, there's a through line. So
It all
thank you
makes
for the
sense now.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the phrases I love on your website is you say that you help people become who they are. And I thought we could dig into this a little bit because I want to know kind of what that means to you and what it means for us to kind of get off track, right? Like,
Mm.
what does it mean to stop or to start maybe becoming something different? And what does it mean to kind of come back to who we are meant to be? So I'd love to kind of hear how you arrived at that phrasing because it's very relatable and understandable, but I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. It's funny because I use that. I've been using that for my newsletter descriptor for a while now, and I don't remember the point at which I was just like, here it is. As writers, we tend to overthink all these things. But at some point, I was like, okay, this is it. I probably got it from Zen practice at some point. But I think becoming who you are is at least I, at some point, earlier in my life, I had this idea that I had to build myself into something. And I think what's become clearer to me and kind of how I got on the path I am is that it's actually not so much that I have to build myself, it's that I have to remove all the layers of things that I am not and just let what's there at the bedrock just be, which is a really long and uncomfortable process. And, one of the big parts of my journey that I didn't mention earlier is that since I was a kid, I had I had some really big episodes with depression, serious depression. And that I really had to work through. So I was kind of forced into this type of work. But, the more time and time again, the more I find that I'm trying to perform or be something for someone else, I start to get completely off track for what I want. And so that for me is sort of the practice is like, and it gets confusing because it's like, I like to help others. I like to serve. I've been in client service in one way or another for most of my career. And I enjoy that. But I can't lose sight of me or everything starts to go to shit.
Yeah. I'm curious if this is part of maybe why you were drawn to the Zen Buddhism and maybe that tension between the sort of entrepreneurial world where you're sort of feeling like I need to position and present myself a certain way and then the Zen
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism. I'm curious kind of what lessons have you drawn from both or what tensions exist between lessons from this over here and lessons from this over here? Like, how do you think about the relationship between those two?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think when I came to Zen, I had been practicing mindfulness in secular ways for a very long time. And I recognized just as like a classic overthinker, which I think probably most of us that are listening to this podcast are, really good brains that do a lot for us, but also can really tie us into knots. just the whole philosophy of meditation, like these are just thoughts that you don't have to take them seriously. You don't have to do anything, right? Was such a world changing concept for me. And then coming across a practice like Zen, where you really kind of just have to do the meditation, you really kind of just have to do the sitting, was what made it, it's like in the practice that concept came to life. And so what was such a massive relief about it was like, in the Zen style of meditation is you sit on a cushion, you stare at the wall, and you keep your eyes open. You don't even close them. So it's really just like the practice is just a radical acceptance of like whatever is right here, which is like sounds outside, I'm uncomfortable, whatever it is. And there was such a relief in that because it was like, I don't have to perform. I don't even have to be turned around looking at anyone right now. This is just me, just being. Which what I think of, for myself, I think like classic trier. That's the entrepreneur in me. It's like I want to do stuff. I've been flinging myself into doing all kinds of stuff since I was young. It took a long time for me to accept that that was just part of my being, but it didn't mean that I had to make myself into someone else to do it. It was like, try and just uncover what's true for me and go after that, as opposed to like, oh, I need to become the vice president of something because it'll impress, which is what I did for a long time. It was like climb ladder to impress others. And then the radical shift in my life was like, no, 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 we're not trying to impress others. We're trying to impress ourselves here, or at least get clearer about what we're here to do.
I took a note here about one of your recent Tiny Revolutions broadcasts that you said, I'm going to kind of paraphrase it. The specificity of other people's ambitions often confuse me. And then you kind of talk about like this idea of like, how do people set their sights on this thing? And they're like, that's the thing I'm becoming. And then you kind of ended it like, how could you know that you wanted to be a doctor if you don't actually know what caring for a patient is? What's involved in the experiential part of becoming that thing? And you finish it by saying the desire came in the doing and the people I encountered in the process. And I think that's really beautiful. So like, I think, yeah, we struggle a lot with this having this very specific outcome in mind. But there's like all this interesting stuff in the process that we're ignoring. Like another entrepreneur friend of ours, Thomas Frank, talks about this a lot, where he's like, okay, so you want to be a big YouTube creator, you want to have this audience and so on and so forth. Here's what a day-to-day life in that creator looks like. Do you want to do all those things? No, you don't want to do those things. It's so how is that? How has that shaped you over the years? Because it feels like you've got like all these different feelers and they're all kind of like, they all come from the same place, but like being in discomfort all the time and not having a clear goal, but being like feeling centered in that progress, it kind of shows in your work really obviously. And from my perspective, at least, how are you in that journey right now?
Well, first of all, thank you. That's a really nice compliment. Yeah, and I have to say that I think that a lot of just how I've arrived at where I am is that I just tried so many things, and because I have been, I was like a little accomplisher. It was like I got the straight A's and I was on the varsity team or whatever, and I did all the things that you're supposed to do, and had so many experiences where I was like, okay, I did that, but like, now what, or like. I remember having this I worked for, when I lived in New York, many years ago, I worked for Sony Corporation, and I did this huge event at the Museum of Modern Art, which was like, I was kind of like a project manager for an event, not a huge deal, but, for me at the time, I was 25 or 26 or something like that. And I remember walking out of there and it had gone perfectly and like everything had gone to plan. It was such a big deal. And I was like, huh. And I was like, wait a minute. Okay, this is not like, I should feel king of the world, queen of the world right now, which I guess in some ways I did, but it was like, I think after having a lot of those types of experiences, I started to question. It's like, well, let me really pry into this. Like, let's say I run the marathon. How long is that gonna, how long is the feeling of peak accomplishing gonna last? And which doesn't mean that you don't get it, but it's more, I just started to pry into those things. And I think where I am now is that I feel somewhat unkillable because I'm trying now to just do things because they're in some ways just like emerging from what, these practices that I do to kind of stay close to myself. Which doesn't always mean that they're like stuff I enjoy. A lot of times they're really not stuff I enjoy, but just kind of have to do. But I think I'm only able to keep all these different plates spinning because I'm not so attached anymore to them really being successful. Yeah.
Do you work with a lot of women as well who are maybe in that sort of achiever mentality? And it's like, if I just hit that next milestone, then I'll feel satisfied. If I just hit, and we keep moving those goalposts. So I'm curious, do you attract people that are kind of have maybe gone through that similar journey where you're like, wait a second, how do I enjoy the work more and get away from this achievement mentality?
Yeah. I'm trying to, and I think that is kind of my vibe. Most of the coaching clients I've had to date are just people that read my newsletter, and I'll mention that I coach every once in a while and get some people that will reach out. And sometimes it is like what you typically find with coaching, is that there's an event or there's something that sort of precipitates why someone would want to make this leap, like there's, they get laid off from a job, or they realize they need to make a career change, or there's a big breakup, or, somebody dies, whatever. And I think that definitely is a point at which you're like, what is this all there is? Like, there's got to be more. And so there is that point. But I think also there was at one point I was using in the newsletter, and I still will say this, even though it's somewhat offensive at this point, is I always thought that I was for high functioning crazy people, where it was like people that, there's a certain level of like, just from where I sit and kind of where a lot of people that I end up working with are people that are highly capable and competent individuals. And then they just reach this point at which they're like, okay, I've realized that I have a lot of power and I have a lot of agency. I'm able to make things happen. And so how do I use my powers for good, but like also for just like more depth, more meaning, and just like a richer life for myself.
What prompted you to formalize the coaching practice? You kind of mentioned that, you're coming across these clients as, hey, I sometimes coach. This is cool. Like, if you want to like reach out, but is that part of that desire to go deeper for yourself there and formalizing it and saying like, yeah, this is actually me. And this is more a part of my practice now. Like what was that journey like?
Well, this is where we start to go deeper into the conversation, and grief and pizza might come up. But I think that I had a big event in my life last year where my mom passed, and a lot of the way that I think about my life is, especially my younger years, I felt like it was sort of a reaction to my mom's life. So my mom had 9 kids. I'm from like this big Irish Catholic family. She never, she worked as a teacher when she was young, and then she spent most of her life was raising kids, and grandkids, and she loved that. But it came at a big cost because she didn't do a lot of the work to get to know herself and put herself first and take care of herself. And so that has ended up being a lot of the work that I've learned, that I've had to do to kind of thrive in this insane chaos, right? Is really learn to take care of myself and look out for me. And so when she passed, and I had a lot of conversations with her about this, but when she passed, it became more of a calling where I was like, there's a lot of women out there who I think I can help. And, I understand I've walked this path before. I mean, I think you'll see, you see a lot among people in sort of healing professions, teaching professions, is that we create the medicine that we need the most for ourselves. And so that very much feels like what the fire inside is. And what I'm working on. And, it's like, I had a really hard time in my late 20s, early 30s. And I think about that person, and it's like, what would I help them with? Which is not to say that it's not, it's not just for people at that age, it's for any age. That's just kind of the me in that time is like my ideal customer in some ways.
It's like if you want to learn something, teach, right?
Totally. Yeah. And that's the other component. Thank you for saying that, is because like, I have to do this work. Like, this never ends. So a lot of this is just like, hey guys, I'm going to be over attending my fire. Do you want to come do it with me? And I'll teach you what I know, kind of. That's like I very much try to think of it as like just being hand in hand with people, that are also high functioning crazy people and maybe need some help getting out of their own way.
Yeah.
Oh.
You even said that recently. I have another note here about, you said something about, your work is never finished. You're always doing the work. And you related it to the Bodhisattva Vow. Do you think you could like define that for our guests and kind of what that means to you? And like, how is that like incorporating the Buddhist mindset, like kind of evolve the work that you're doing and the way that you see your responsibility as a coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are actually a lot of parallels, I think, between Buddhism and coaching as a discipline. Joe Hudson, who was on your podcast, who I really love that interview. He was great, and I don't know that he spoke directly to it, but it was like a lot of stuff where I was like, But both of those things, coaching and Buddhism, or and Zen, they maintain that inherently you are perfect as you are, right? And so it is, we all have Buddha nature, and it is on us to treat ourselves and everyone else with respect and care and thoughtfulness, mindfulness, all these things. The Bodhisattva vow is a vow that says, beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to surpass, or, I just garbled that last one. It's like, Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it, something like that. But right in there in the vows are, Bodhisattva is a being, and Jesus was thought to be a Bodhisattva, for example, who has vowed to help others before they go across to wherever, whatever that is. But you see it right there in the vow that the work is never over. Like, it's like, and it's never, it's like you never get to the top of the mountain, but it doesn't mean you don't climb the mountain. It just means that there's like a clarity that this is just how it is, right?
One of the things I really appreciate, and I thought might be kind of fun to talk about, is there's an aspect of sort of living out loud, right? Like, you've been publishing on the internet and publishing this thinking, struggles, whatever it is that you're doing. And as, someone else that creates content, Ben and I trying to live out loud, put our content out there. It's a super vulnerable thing to put your thinking, your experience, your struggles out there. And just the fact that, you are in the foster community, that's a big part of the work that you're doing there. I just love to know a little bit more about how you navigate that sharing. Do you ever feel like you need to censor what you're thinking because you're still going through it, or maybe that's sharing too much information? Do you ever struggle to navigate that line of sharing too much, or do you kind of put it all out there? How do you think about how you show up on the internet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that as much as I share, there's a lot I hold back and that I don't share. So there's a lot of discernment in what I'm willing to put out there. I think a lot of my ability to share freely is due to having done work in community for a very long time. So before I started writing Tiny Revolutions, I had been taking writing workshops for like 15, 20 years. And when you write and read a lot, especially if you're working with writers who write creative nonfiction, which was my, craft area, there are no surprises. It's like, humans are humans. Like, you could say the most fucked up thing you could possibly think of, and people will be like, oh, totally. Yeah. It's like, yeah. Or either they're nodding along, or they're thinking of a friend or whatever. And so, there's some level of just like putting the reps in and realize that there's kind of not that much you can say to shock people at this point, which means, you're not so different from everyone else. But then also, doing the work in community with, Foster clearly doing, but also Zen practice, you can start to, I don't know, it's like you develop the muscle where it's like, yeah, I can say something scary, but it's usually not as scary once other people hear it, because they'll be like, oh my God, thank you for saying it, and that was my the earliest impetus for starting Tiny Revolutions was actually because I had a business fail And I'd gone into this deep depression after it because I'd walked away from it and was just like crushed and needed somewhere to put my energy. And so I started writing about my experiences with depression. I didn't write about the startup. I didn't write about anything. I just wrote about what it felt like to be depressed, because I was like, why do more people not talk about it? Like, this is clearly something that affects people. It was right after Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade had killed themselves. And it was like, these are like some of the most incredible, creative, wonderful minds. And it's right there, So I started writing really from a raw place. And even just those earlier issues, which are really not, you can go back and read them. They're not like masterworks of art, but they were saying something true. And I think they really hit a nerve or struck a chord with a lot of people that were reading it, because it just has been and continues to be pretty rare to hear people really speak honestly about what they're going through. On that front.
Yeah. I know you've mentioned having some sort of crash and burns, over the years, and how you've really developed a resiliency in yourself and in your business. Are you willing to share maybe a little bit more about like some of those little breadcrumbs of those crash and burn moments, or kind of like what you've learned from those moments that you've been able to take forward into your coaching practice today?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that comes to mind is funny. So I had a startup that I co-founded with two friends of mine. One was a woman that I actually had worked for years ago in public relations. I worked at Bank of America, and she'd been my manager there, and we'd become friends. Really smart, great person. And then another friend of mine who was a software developer, and so he was kind of our CTO. And we built this. We built basically a beta version of an app that was like beauty product recommendations between friends. So the idea was like, this was like 6 or 7 years ago. I actually still think people are doing this in different ways, but the idea was, you can't really trust online reviews, but who can you trust? Like, people you actually know. So it was like, why don't we find a place for that? And it was really fun. It was a great, I'd worked at many startups for a lot of years, but it was my first experience trying to build one of my own and putting together the product and all that stuff.
And with friends.
So fun. And with friends.
Also pretty unique. Yeah.
So fun. And basically, like, without getting into the details, my co-founder, who'd been my old boss, and my other co-founder and I had just very deep differences of opinion about how to take it forward. So we got to a point where we had put together this beta and had like a little community, and, had some pretty good metrics where we had, put together a deck. We're going to raise a seed round, and me and the CTO were just like so at odds that it was like, if we do raise money, now we're tied to this person who has an extremely different way of thinking about it. And it was just like, I think I had enough clarity to know at that point, because I'd been through a few different startup crashing and burning type experiences, that I was like, this is as far as I've ever gotten with something like this, but it would only get harder and more gnarly once that kind of money was involved, right? And so I made this really difficult decision to walk away, and ended my relationship totally with my co-founder. Still haven't talked to her. And I'm sure at some point we will. She's a great person. But yeah, it was like, I think what I learned from that was anything that I'm going to do has to be more emergent from like what I genuinely care about, which, while I thought that was a great product idea, do I, at the end of the day, actually care that much about beauty product recommendations between friends? Maybe not.
That you're willing to go all in. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like, is this the hill I'm prepared to die on? And, I'm sure you could like extrapolate and put any number of different meanings behind that. But when I really kind of backed up and like came back to me, it was like, this isn't it, this isn't the one. And so that, I think, was helpful in that, I got further than I had ever gotten in terms of building a product and a community. But I also got, there was so much I learned about, it's like you look back on an experience like that and you're like, wow, I was wildly naive about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's where all the juicy learning comes from, right?
Totally. But yeah, just coming out of that one, it was a real clarifying experience. And I was like, yes, love to build, love to create. No, very clarifying experience in terms of like, what really would I what's my ride or die mission, which I think I'm much closer to now.
Yeah, I think I've been in a similar kind of position for quite a few years because prior to founding Notion Mastery, we had a SaaS platform for online courses. And we ran that for a long time, and we didn't really have I didn't really have any interest in building an online course at that point. So it was more like solving a problem that I wasn't super invested in. And then we decided to sunset the platform just because it was more of a content creation thing than an actual application. And then now that we have Notion Mastery, I often get these pangs of I hear people asking for these things, and I think about oh, I could solve that problem with my old software that I build or make this new thing with it. But then I think I always get sniped on those on the problem solving versus what does it actually mean for me to solve that problem? And so I sometimes get stuck in this decision-making process of should I start working on this thing? Because is it really something that it's that I feel
it's just because you can doesn't mean you need to be the one to solve it.
Yeah. Marie even made that, you made that amazing Notion template for beauty, for
the beauty products.
Comparing the stuff that's in the products and being able to almost a self-recommendation engine. And now it's there's so many of these interesting no-code tools you could develop something like that for yourself. But yeah, it's an interesting journey.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think that's an interesting thing that you bring up about Marie, you making this template, because I think where I'm trying to get to with the becoming who you are is that you get back to a place where it's you only do these things because you kind of have to do them. So it's if something emerges from you because you're oh, totally, we need this, and I'm just going to whip it, that's one thing. But it's if you get yourself into the situation where you're I could do this, right? I totally could build this. I have done it before. I fall into this trap all the time, by the way, because I have done so many things to pay the bills over the year, especially as a writer. That's one of my core competencies. So people will come and be hey, we need a writer on such and such. And I'll be and then I'll be wait. But it does come back to that, and I think this is a function of getting older too, is that you're realistically, my energy is somewhat limited. So if I do that, then I'm taking a huge pull of energy from this that would probably be diverted to something that's way more close to the center. And it's obviously not perfect. And I take I'll do little odd jobs here and there if they seem fun or not too taxing. But I think coming back to that, I can, but should I is where that getting really close to yourself thing really makes such a difference.
I was laughing about this the other day because I wrote this Ruby script that automatically takes all of our Stripe transactions, breaks them down into every payment, figures out where that person was, and then auto explains it in our bookkeeping software, attaches invoices. And after I did it, I was so amped up and oh, I solved this interesting programming problem, because that's the kind of stuff that gets me really excited. And then I was oh, this could definitely be a SaaS because this is a hard problem and people would really like this. And then I immediately was okay, bookkeeping is the thing that I hate the most doing in life. So that's not a place
taxes and compliance. Ooh, let's do more of that.
So it's absolutely, this is a great thing that for me to solve, and I could do it, and I know it really well now. But I'm but is that where I want to live? I want to live in the taxation and the compliance zone. Oof, no. So it was an easy no for me. And I think as you develop that, discovering who you are, it makes it easier to make those decisions, even though they from an outsider's perspective might seem well, that's a really awesome money-making opportunity. And it's nice to be able to say, yeah, don't care. Don't want to do that.
Totally. It's someone should do that, just not me. No,
well, you mentioned energy, and so I just would love to chat about this a little bit too, because as someone with ADHD, I have to be very, very mindful of how much energy things take. And so I'm curious, like you said, as we get older, we have to be more mindful about this. There's only so much time we have in the day and energy that we have in the day. Not every task is equal. And so I'm curious if you have your own kind of internal decision-making, framework for how you think about, I only have this many hours where I'm on per day, or, I'm kind of curious, maybe getting into the weeds a bit of how you think about your time or maybe structure your days and how that looks when you think about what you take on or don't take on.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I wish I had like a clear system that I could point to, and I've actually seen your course or some of the guidance that you've put out, and I'm like, okay, I should totally do that. I don't have ADHD that I'm aware of, but do I think I would benefit? Yes. My sister has really bad ADHD, so maybe there's a touch. I don't know how it works, but I really kind of at this point just operate from a more intuitive sense. Like I am very committed to the things that I sort of think of as keeping me sane, which are exercise, mindfulness type practices, whether it's, Zen meditation or other stuff, and having some kind of quiet at some point in the day. And so I kind of build my life around making sure I do those things because I think my quality of life sort of precipitously declines if I do not. But when I think about, there's also day to day, it's a little different, but one thing that is major for me is the menstrual cycle. Like there is a week of the month where strategic thought is not happening in my brain. My colleagues at Foster know, because I'm just like, sorry,
It's
like
week
I
3,
know,
guys.
yeah, like don't know what to tell you. It's just not, there. And I feel extremely grateful that I can actually openly talk about, like talk about things that are shocking in life. I never thought I would ever talk about this stuff publicly. But when it comes to energy, there's a really wonderful writer, thinker named Kate Northrup. And I can't remember the name of her book off the top of my head, but she's got a whole thing on cycle, energetic work according to your cycle. And like, she got this soundbite, I think, that's like men operate on like a 24-hour cycle and women are on the monthly cycle. And that has been super helpful. I can't always map my workload to it, but at least awareness, of where I am, like, is a lot of the way for like me having patience with myself, grace with myself when I'm not, it's like there are just times where I'm not tip top. And so I have to, instead I used to beat myself up for that terribly, especially in agency world where deadlines would happen and I would just be like, it would be like beating myself against the wall, but I don't do that. I try to roll with it a little bit more these days.
How did you get to that point? Because I think it's an easy thing to be like, oh, stop beating yourself up, have more self-compassion. But obviously that's been a practice. Yeah. So, how did you get to the point where you were able to kind of let go of some of these things and sort of make peace with who you are, how you are?
Yeah.
Is that the Zen Buddhism?
Yeah. I mean, Zen practice has definitely help with this a lot. I think it's also kind of what I was talking about before about just knowing that you're not the only one that's like this. It's like the less we feel like I'm uniquely fucked up, then the easier it is to forgive ourselves. It's like everyone struggles with screen time, like you're not a piece of shit because you spent 5 hours on your phone yesterday. You're just a person, right? So there's a little bit of like,
they're designed to be addictive,
they're
right?
designed
So
for you to spend as much, it's like much
Exactly.
time as possible. But I think it's just, I do think meditation has been a big one in just like, you just you just watch the nonstop stream of like bullshit, and just kind of get tired of it. But I think also what's helped me is just hearing, my family is super self-critical, my family of origin. So I've seen a lot of that in my siblings. And, it's like you listen to people talk badly about themselves and you're like, don't say that. Like, you're the best. Like, don't. And so it's made me more aware of my self-talk as well, where it's just like, oh, you probably wouldn't want to hear me, say something unkind. It's like, imagine if I was just having this conversation where I'm like, imagining me as an 8-year-old. Like, would you say that to her? Like, come on, let's try to be nice. It's hard,
the way
though.
We talk to ourselves compared to, we would never talk to a friend that way, or that friend would probably never want to hang out with us. And so why do we feel like it's okay to use that kind of language every day with ourselves?
Yeah, but I think that's definitely a practice. And I would say a big person whose work has helped me a lot is Dr. Kristen Neff, who you might be familiar with. She's got she's a professor, I want to say at UT Austin maybe, or somewhere down south, but she's got a whole library of self-compassion exercises and guided meditations and stuff on her website. So I've done definitely lots of like SOS, 5-minute self-compassion break meditations have been super helpful for me.
Amazing. And for anyone that's maybe hasn't dipped their toe in the water of meditation or anything like that, like what are maybe some of the first exercises or places that you might recommend folks to just even begin to think a little bit more about that, or to have that quietness? Or is there something like beginner 101 that you could recommend to someone?
Wow, what would I say? I think, well, there's so many apps now, which are great. I mean, it's like the deeper you get into meditation, the more you're kind of like, apps, they're just trying to steal your attention like anything else. But they're fantastic for kind of educating you about what a mindfulness practice even is. So, I haven't tried many of them just because I've done it more in the world, but Headspace is great, Calm is great, Waking Up, I've heard a lot of great things about. Because there's kind of like, it's like the 101 concept is that you are not your thoughts, right? If you can detach your thoughts from who you are, you can just sort of watch them, right? And listen to what is going on and just try to be, it's a practice of becoming more present and just a witness of our thoughts, as opposed to like a feeling attacked by them. And that was certainly my story, because I had such a harsh, internal critic and all that. But so I would say like any one of those apps is probably a good idea. Also, the way I learned to meditate was just going to a local Shambhala center. This was, I think 2009, and just doing like an intro to meditation. You could do it. There's lots of secular places that do it now, but a Zen center Zen's kind of jumping right in the deep end, which if you feel called, like, go for it. What I do find more often is that people will come to it after, as a deepening of practice. But tons, like, I'm trying to think of, I'm kind of drawing a blank, but like anywhere that just offers meditation instruction, there's tons of different traditions out there. And so like, I think it's more, it's like, everyone's so looking for like the perfect thing or the right thing, but really it's just like, go to the place down the street, like go to what's available, just start somewhere. And that comes back to what you were talking about, Ben, earlier, which is just like, you find things in the doing. And I think that's so much like, we have so many choices available to us, and so much, so much available to us that we get overwhelmed and then we do nothing. But it's really often just like, if you're thinking about like the midwit meme, be the guy on the left or the right, and just like go pick something and know that whatever happens from there, it happens. You don't have to have a huge plan. You can just do some stuff, that's I think the best to start.
I think I really like that from your last Tiny Revolutions. You had a quote that was like, my actions are my only belongings. That feels like it kind of resonates with what you're saying there.
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because it's easy for me to say that right now, because I'm in this period of time where I'm like, I'm at my dad's house. I'm a digital nomad. While I figure out, I just left LA after like, 18 years. And so I'm kind of figuring out what's next. Yeah, big life shift. Change. Yeah. And that was also partially inspired by my mom's passing. It was just sort of like, it's time to, venture further out here. But I don't really have a lot of belongings right now. The belongings I do have are in storage. And it's kind of, this is like a very literal way of interpreting that teaching, but it's just like, you'd be surprised at how little you actually need in order to do your thing, especially if you're like us and you have like an email job, and it's like, then it just becomes like, what are the, what you're doing? Like, what are you doing every day? Like, that's really what your life is.
I love that.
So what's next for you?
Yeah. What are some of the experiments that you're, and if I might ask as well, you may be not so goal driven, or I don't know if you actually have here's a goal that I want to do this year. Do you ever set up formal experiments for yourself, or are you just sort of open to whatever emerges, or are you like, Q1, I'm going to try this out as an experiment? I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. There was a while where I was like, no more goals, and that's also a very Zen thing, right? Like we talk about goalless practice, but I actually do think it's helpful to have intentions. I think that's the more popular word we're using for goals at this point, but intentions. So I do have intentions. Again, my intentions is like, get Tiny Revolutions off the ground. The first experiment is just do some workshops to introduce what the program entails, and see who kind of comes in the door and is curious, right? Like my intention is to launch a group coaching program, or to launch my first sort of like cohort in February, probably it might be more March timeframe at this point, but that I think will happen. I'm also exploring doing something IRL and opening an in-person practice space. And that could be, you know, the MVP of that might be like I host a class, you know, I host a class at a yoga studio or a meditation studio or something like that and start there. But those are kind of the first things. Like the other thing is that, and you guys, I feel like you guys will might have some good stories, so I'm curious, but right now I've got like multiple brands happening. So it's like I have Tiny Revolutions, and then I'm like, well, now I have the Fire Inside, and then it's like, but I'm Sarah Campbell, you know, and that's my website. Yeah. And it's like, where do I, so part of my intention is like, at least kind of put some rails around where I spend my time and how I, you know, where I publish. Cause I also am doing quite a lot with Foster, which is another project I absolutely love. But, you know, Foster's its own thing because it's like that is a collective, and I have like a whole team that I work with on that. But then Fire Inside and Tiny Revolutions are just me, and Tiny Revolutions will always be me, but the Fire Inside will probably be a team, you know, in the not so distant future. So there's some organization and sort of like thought that I'm putting now into like what those, you know, what comes out in both of those places, or in all of those places. That is something I have to untangle in the coming months / year.
I don't even think we have, I mean, I definitely don't think we have any like advice on that front, because our brands are often very confusing. You know, we have my personal site and mariepoulin.com, like that's actually the thing that drives a lot of interest is Marie's personal exploration, and her own brand is what drives a lot of interest to something like Notion Mastery. And then that's our product. And we also have Okie Dokie, which is Marie and I's business together. And the weird thing about Okie Dokie is that we just treat it almost like as an umbrella around our two personal brands. In fact, when we were only running Okie Dokie as a consulting agency, we effectively ran two independent companies within that brand. Like I had my clients and Marie had her clients, and occasionally there would be a crossover between our clients that would demand that we build something together. And that was how eventually we were like, we should just start a company. It makes the, you know, all the revenue stuff coming into one source. We have one tax return and so on and so forth. But yeah, we've never really fully resolved that. And so a lot of our questioning is like, where does this content belong? Is this Marie? Is this something, you know, and generally we do, okay, it's Notion related. It goes on Notion Mastery. If it's personal productivity or like, you know, personal development, it goes on Marie's site. And I just write weird stuff that doesn't really go anywhere a lot of times. So yeah, it's a tricky thing to resolve.
And I think sometimes there's this like, is this a brand? Is this a product? Is this a team? Like there's lots of different ways of looking at a thing. And then sometimes we're thinking maybe too far out that it prevents us from making a good decision now. So for example, with Notion Mastery, that was just a page on my personal website that's like, hey, I have a product, here's a course, buy it here. And once it grew to a certain point where I was like, ooh, this kind of needs its own like search engine traffic and its own brand. Maybe this needs to live on a different URL. So I think I can just relate to the difficulty sometimes where you're like, wait a second, is this just a product that lives under my personal brand and I can hire a team and grow that later and then move that to its own thing? And so that can be a hard thing to navigate when you don't want to get too tripped up in the, like, what's the 5-year, 10-year plan, you know, and you want to just get moving. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. No, thank you for saying all that. It's really interesting because, well, I'm like really thrilled to hear that you're just kind of like, it just kind of goes how it goes and you're able to navigate that, because that is one of those things where I am feeling like, oh God, I have to figure this out, but maybe I don't know.
A lot of decisions are not as permanent, I think, as we think they are. It's like, you know what, when you're ready, you can go buy that domain, point it to a different website when you're ready. Like there's lots of things that, they're often not permanent decisions. And so you can always change your mind later. Yes, there might be different challenges, marketing challenges that come along with that, but it's all figure outable for the most part. So get the LLC when you're ready to get the LLC. But for now, that can be a page on your site. And so there's lots of different ways I think you could approach it, and none are wrong. They're just going to have different consequences or, follow-up outcome. But it's all
It's just
figured
like,
out.
you do something and then you do something else based on how that goes, right?
Even like experimenting with this podcast and posting YouTube shorts, and then someone's like, "Oh, you didn't add a title, so it just shows the date." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'll do that, differently next time." And so I think sometimes just taking action and being like, "Oh, okay, that's not quite what I was expecting. We can shift gears. That's totally fine."
Yeah, I'm very obsessed with that right now, because even with the starting the podcast, like we recorded the first episode with Joe, and then we sat on it, like we edited it down and we sat on it for like 3 weeks before we actually published it, because we got stuck on this thing of like, well, should we have an introduction episode that like
Do we need a
introduces
logo?
me and
How does this
Marie and
work?
I, like, how, but can we publish the episode, and then if we wanted to add an intro episode later, can we go back and like order the episode so that it's first, so it doesn't feel like weird? And then so you get stuck on these decisions, and and so Marie was like, let's record our intro episode, and I was very adamant, like, no, we're going to ship this.
What if we just
and
shipped it
that's it
and figured it
That's
out later?
We'll figure that out later, and we're not going to worry about it, and kind of
Love
like
it.
let it grow. So I think often, just get something out there, and then it can evolve over time. Like most of those things I find are typically technical questions, like, is this a subpage on my website, or is it a subdomain, or is it a full domain? Like, that's a technical question. Just get it out there. Even if it's in a Notion document or something that has no discernible domain, at least you can directly give it to somebody. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, how long have you guys been thinking about the podcast, or how did that? I know you mentioned it was sort of something that emerged maybe from Art of Accomplishment, but I was curious. Yeah.
When did the first inklings
I think we
start then?
created a project to launch a podcast about 2 months before we went to Japan for a month. So this was probably in the summer of last year. And I think I had been on a few podcasts last year. And I always enjoy just talking to people. And then it's like, oh, now we have this cool piece of art that doesn't require a lot of like pre-planning and pre-thought. And, I think I'm not as loquacious as you are, Sarah, with the writing stuff. So like it's something in a way, and Barrett kind of highlighted this on the last episode, because I sent him a clip of one of the things that he said, and I was like, I am obsessed with this, Barrett. It's such a good statement. And he said something along the lines of, oh wow, like I actually said something that I hadn't crystallized for me yet. But now it became this thing that he's like, oh, that's exactly it. So we often do a better job at kind of talking out our ideas than actually like implementing them and
processing
writing
it,
about them. And I think my desire to do the podcast came on a podcast called Crazy Wisdom, and I started talking about the direction that Marie and I were taking our business. And after I went back and listened to that podcast, I was like, that doesn't even sound like me. It was so like I self-inspired myself to want to move forwards. And it was such a weird,
Damn, I'm pretty smart.
yeah, it was such an
guy?
unlocking. It's such an unlocking for me, where you can you verbally process things in that way. So then I was like, oh, like I want to have these conversations with people so that they can verbally process, and we can have these conversations, and something new can evolve from that. And so that just got me really excited. And then when we got back from Japan, we kind of had that, time warp of holiday seasons, and we were like, all right, let's do this. Let's just book somebody. And Joe, we had been talking to Joe already, and we just started his Great Decisions course this morning, which we're really excited about.
Nice.
And he very graciously offered to come on, and that was it. So here we are.
Nice. Yeah, it was like the star was like, hey, I'm here. Okay. It's a sign.
Things are aligned. Yeah, and I'll just add too that I think one of the things I love and appreciate is that Ben and I can have these 2 hour long morning conversations over coffee. And then I'm like, oh man, like so much emerges from those conversations and notes and ideas and product ideas. I'm like, like I wish we'd recorded that. So I was partly like, maybe we should actually record some of these sessions, whether it's a solo episode or something, or duo episode with the two of us. But there is so much benefit personally to that verbal processing that sometimes you don't even know how you feel about a thing till it's out there. So there's that sort of casual coffee conversations. It's not just business, it's not just personal, it's all kind of intermixed. I'm like, what would it look like if we brought more of these conversations to the light and didn't just kind of have them at our kitchen table? Because like you said, other people are probably thinking about this stuff too. So what does it look like to put your ideas out there and kind of see where there's resonance with other listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's what's something so interesting about the podcast. Podcast is a medium, is that it's like that ability to be sort of fly on the wall. And I definitely put my vote in the camp of you guys broadcasting some of those discussions because, there's just a lot there. And it's like being in someone else's mind and their thought process is it's like one of the things that I love about writing is just being in the company of someone else's mind. But, especially the work that you all are doing where there's a lot of creation and, interesting internet things that nobody's really done before coming up, right? So like that's super valuable.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just one of our many experiments this year. And the word emergence came up, but for me, I think that's my word of the year. Is like, how can I be more open to things just emerging in a natural way, collaborations that just sort of present themselves, and I'm open to it. So this year is going to be a lot more about experimentation and emergence, and less about needing to know exactly what's going to happen each quarter and all that.
Oh, I love that. Ben, do you have a word of the year?
Yeah, my word of the year is expressive. Yeah, I've been, and the podcast really is part of that. I think, I think I've been same with Marie, very focused on outcomes and the things that like I think I should be doing, and getting kind of stuck in that mode of creating things that people are asking of me. I'm sort of an obsessive problem solver. I get very sniped on when somebody's stuck on something. I'm like, I very quickly latch on to that. And so it feels good to me to like help people get unblocked and move forwards. But I think in a sense over the years, like I've been kind of doing that to my own detriment. And so I'm thinking about like, how can I solve my own problems and create in that respect, instead of solving other people's problems directly. And then it's like, I think by sharing what I'm discovering about myself and unblocking myself and sharing those things, I hope to have a similar impact on people's lives through that work and discovering, self-discovery versus just solving immediate problems. So I think there's like a depth quotient that I'm seeking outside of just the problem solving thing, but yeah,
I love that.
Always a balance.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like we talk a lot about this at Foster because really, we're for writing, just helping you write and get better, but it's sort of a Trojan horse for self-development. All of it is. It's just like, what are the tangible things that you want to do that you're like, yeah, I want to, build a product or solve this problem, but it's like, what do you really want to do? And it's really like that goes a mile deep. So that's super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have a very similar, that's kind of how we treat Notion mastery at this point. Like we have a pretty good system now where we have a cycle of showing up and delivering workshops per month. We do office hours and things like that. And so there's kind of a nice little churning along business. And so we can use that area and the space to develop some of these parallel ideas. And yeah, I've described it as similar to a Trojan horse. Somebody called it a virus the other day, because we were talking about productivity and stuff, and I was talking about how like we find that most of the things that people get stuck on when it comes to productivity are not how do I Notion, but the stuff around energy management, capacity planning, values, and all this beliefs, different stuff. Yeah. And so we're like, yes, come for the Notion, stay for this stuff that
crisis?
Like this is the stuff. Yes.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So yeah, that's more of like I want to develop more of that side of things, the existential crisis side of things. Yeah, it's exciting.
Fun stuff is, yeah.
Love it.
What about yourself? Do you have a word for the year or a way of framing
Oh
up
yeah,
things?
my word is action. So it's kind of right there. It's funny. It's like that was like a very actiony word for me to decide upon. Which since I'm like, well, emergence would be more elegant. You know, I'm like, or whatever. We're just gonna do some shit this year, and like,
Love
you know,
it.
like I asked about the podcast because like a couple years ago, it's funny. I can go back and look at Tiny Revolutions issues and be like, yeah. But I had this whole like concept for a podcast that I then just kept putting off and never did it. And, you know, for all the reasons that you just cite, where it's like overwhelm, you know, procrastination, whatever it was. But I don't know, you're inspiring me. Maybe that'll be one of my
Oh,
actions
is that something
this year.
you're
Is
thinking
like,
about as a medium? Yeah.
yeah, bringing it back. Just, you know, and not even have to be something, you know, huge, but just more like conversations with really interesting people who are creating stuff, you know.
I definitely recommend checking out what Brett Kissler and Joe Hudson are doing with the Art of Accomplishment podcast. I really like how it's sort of integrated into the program. So they actually do these episodic series, which are like 4 or 5 episodes on the frameworks. And that's actually, for example, we just started the Great Decisions course, and our first assignment for the weekend is to listen to 2 podcasts that they've already produced. So it becomes this beautiful like sequence, or not even a sequence, but an ecosystem of like people can listen to the podcast independent of the course and get these transformational, you know, learnings. But when they're actually delivering the podcast as part of the course and part of the coaching material in a way. So maybe there's a nice
kind of
little
all feed
synchronicity there
Yeah.
for you, where the Fire Inside could have a podcast and like week 1, check in the forums, set up your one-on-one with me and go listen to
Goes with
number
this
2
podcast, yeah.
podcast, you know, so you have like that. It's all sort of part of the same thing, but can be extracted and delivered independently for like even teasers for what kind of stuff you're doing in the course and the coaching.
And if you're
program.
already putting your
Yeah.
ideas out there
love that.
already through writing, it's just another
Yeah.
medium, right? To do double duty.
Yeah, totally. It's funny because like in some ways I'm just a way better talker, you know, and so
Yeah,
it's just sort of like I just need to just do it. All in good
And
time,
the
though.
AI tools as well to kind of extract and do the show notes and all that. Like you might even find some of your writing gets easier because you talk it out, and then you've got the
Yeah, and
scripts
it's
to
just
work
there.
with. So
Yeah.
I vote yes. I
Yeah.
would.
Thank you.
Like
Have you
and
guys
subscribe.
published your thank you. Have you guys published your like tool stack? And I got to run in a second, but your tool stack for producing the podcast, I personally would be very curious about that.
We'll put it together and share it with
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Sarah. Where can people find out more about
Thank you.
the Fire Inside and Tiny Revolutions and sign up for your newsletter?
The simplest course of action would just be to go to saracampbell.co, Sarah without an H, Campbell, and you'll see a little bit about me. So newsletter, coaching, Zen stuff, Foster, it's all there.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so
Excellent.
much for having me. I really enjoyed meeting you guys. And
Yeah, it's been a delight.
yeah.
It's great to meet.
Yeah. Okay.
Take care.
Amazing.
Have a good
See
weekend.
you on the internet.
See you on the internet.
Bye for now.